Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My youth was once again, my name is Eunice Weveti. I work in the Center for Environmental Governance and Climate Change here at Kenya School of Government. And ladies and gentlemen, this is when rubber meets the road. So I'd like to read us the summit communique. It is projected on the screens. So it is still pegged on the theme, institutionalizing climate action in Kenya, policy alignment, leadership coordination, and localized implementation. So I'll begin with a preamble that Kenya has emerged as a continental leader in climate governance, anchored in a robust legal and policy framework that includes the Climate Change Act of 2016, the ambitious nationally determined contributions, and its convening of the 2023 Africa Climate Summit. The Africa Climate Summit culminated in the Nairobi Declaration, which called for Africa to move from policy ambition to decisive implementation. Yet, a significant delivery gap persists, driven by fragmented execution, underutilized institutional capacity, and weak coordination across ministries, departments, agencies, and county governments. The 2025 Climate Action Summit was conceived as a catalytic platform to bridge this gap by strengthening whole of government, whole of society delivery systems, enhancing intergovernmental coordination, and embedding accountability mechanisms across all levels. By aligning devolved climate action with national priorities such as Vision 2030 and the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, the summit aimed to inform Kenya's global reporting posture at COP30 and showcase tangible implementation progress ahead of COP31. Convened by the Kenya School of Government and partners under the theme Institutionalizing Climate Action in Kenya, Policy Alignment, Leadership Coordination, and Localized Implementation, the summit, which has taken place since October 28th to 31st today, brought together about 400 delegates from national and county governments, youth and women networks, civil society, academia, the private sector, and development partners. Plenary discussions centered on policy coherence, leadership synergy, and localized action, complemented by expert presentations, panel sessions, side events, and experience sharing forums like the one we had yesterday. Participants explored pathways to reduce emissions, enhance resilience, mobilize climate finance, and amplify youth-led innovations, driving the low-carbon transition. The summit reaffirmed Kenya's commitment to inclusive, equitable, and transformative climate governance in the lead-up to COP30 in Belém, Brazil. During the summit, the following communique was released. The summit, acknowledging the intensifying catastrophic impacts of climate change across Kenya and the African continent at large, including adverse effects such as prolonged droughts, recurrent flooding, forest loss, biodiversity degradation, and rising vulnerabilities affecting livelihoods and public health, highlighting that these impacts are unevenly distributed across populations, with the brunt of impacts disproportionately borne by the vulnerable groups, specifically the women, the youth, persons with disabilities, older persons, children, and the marginalized communities. Recognizing Kenya's leadership in advancing climate resilience and low-carbon development through the implementation of the current national environmental jurisprudence and devolved climate governance frameworks that empower county governments as first responders and innovators in climate action, noting that counties are at the front lines of both climate impact and response, and that they must therefore be equipped, financed, capacitated to implement adaptive measures that respond to local realities, while ensuring that community voices and indigenous knowledge systems are fully integrated into planning and implementation. Cognizant of the urgency to institutionalize climate governance structures that are inclusive, transparent, and accountable, and the essence to mainstream climate into all levels of policy, planning, and public investment, reaffirming the principles of justice, equity, inclusivity, localization, knowledge, innovation, solidarity, and cooperation as critical in collectively defining the country's unified position toward COP30, recalling the commitments of the Paris Agreement, the African Union Climate Strategy, and the Sustainable Development Goals, reaffirming Kenya's path to a sustainable and resilient future must be rooted in shared responsibility, social justice, and the empowerment of all citizens, particularly affirmative action groups whose voices have too often been underrepresented in decision-making. appreciating the active engagement and thought leadership demonstrated throughout the summit deliberations, which covered critical sub-themes including policy alignment, leadership coordination, devolved governance, urban climate resilience, public-private partnerships in nationally determined contributions, and the strengthening of climate research and innovation systems. Affirming that climate change presents not only a developmental challenge, but also an opportunity for Kenya and Africa to pioneer green growth through renewable energy transitions, sustainable mobility, nature-based solutions, and circular economy innovations, thereby creating dignified livelihoods and contributing to global emission reductions. Observing that effective climate governance demands coordination across government, private sector, and civil society, and that policy coherence and institutional alignment are essential to ensure measurable, inclusive, and accountable progress. Noting further that inclusive participation of affirmative action groups remains indispensable to achieving just and sustainable climate outcomes, and that their leadership and innovation constitute a powerful asset for national transformation. Recognizing the pivotal role of youth in advancing Kenya's climate resilience development, affirming the need for sustained capacity building to strengthen their engagement in climate governance, acknowledging Kipra's leadership in and emphasizing the importance of youth-driven innovation and dialogue in shaping transparent, equitable, and sustainable policy outcomes, reaffirming commitment to nurturing a generation of informed and empowered climate leaders driving Kenya's green transition. Underscoring the importance of effective policy advocacy and negotiation in advancing climate action, highlighting public participation as vital for achieving sustainable peace and equitable resource management, reiterating scaling community innovations and strengthening multi-stakeholder partnerships as key to building a resilient and climate-secure Kenya. We, the delegates of the Climate Action Summit, therefore resolve to 1. Champion an inclusive climate agenda that mainstreams the participation and leadership of vulnerable and marginalized groups, including women, youth, indigenous peoples, and persons with disability in all stages of climate policy and project cycles. Scale up youth-led innovations, climate innovations, driving the low-carbon transition. Advance commitment to the pursuit of climate justice through strengthened institutional arrangements, equitable climate financing, and the localization of climate actions at community and county levels, translating commitments into measurable outcomes. Promote research collaboration and knowledge sharing among academia, government, and development partners to generate context-specific solutions that inform responsive policy. Promote inclusive and devolved climate governance, enhance leadership coordination across ministries and counties, and foster a culture of accountability and evidence-based planning. Catalyze climate-smart investments such as carbon credit initiatives by leveraging public-private partnerships, expanding renewable energy transitions, and scaling community-based adaptation aligned with the Kenyan nationally determined contributions. Support and scale up capacity development to strengthen the ability of individuals, communities, and institutions to address the climate-related challenges, to ensure that both state and non-state actors possess the knowledge and tools necessary to design, implement, and monitor climate programs effectively. Advocate for policy implementation and climate action that integrate women's leadership in decision-making, recognizing that policy informs practice and practice informs policy. Foster multi-stakeholder collaboration and community ownership through sustained platforms for dialogue, joint action, and monitoring of locally led climate solutions. Promote participation, community awareness for the actualization of environmental rights. Protect vital climate enablers and nature-based solutions to actualize sustainable development goals. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, submit the resolutions of the summit for presentation in the upcoming COP in Brazil. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the Climate Action Summit in 2025 concluded with a renewed sense of urgency and solidarity, emphasizing that meaningful climate action is not optional, but essential for a sustainable and equitable future. There was unified commitment to work collectively across all levels of government and society to foster inclusive